Hey everyone, Codeth here. We just got the patch notes for Diablo 4, patch 1.4.3. This patch is going to be released on June 17th, which is next Monday. So let's go over it. We got some unexpected things. I did not expect healing potions to be buffed. Looks like they're getting buffed across the board for their initial healing amount. So that includes minor, light, moderate, strong, greater, major, and superior healing potions. Legendary aspect of the Protector. The barrier cooldown's being reduced from 30 to 20 seconds. And we got some buffs to the Uber Uniques here. Did not expect this. So Andariel's Visage. Poison Nova now spawns on the enemy instead of the player, and Poison Nova damage increased by 50%. So that's pretty cool. Doombringer, your Shadow Explosion damage is being increased by 100%. Ring of the Starless Skies is getting a nice buff here. Maximum stacks of resource cost reduction and bonus damage increased from 4 to 5. This increases the maximum amount of resource cost reduction and bonus damage from 40 to 50%. So that's a really nice buff there. That's multiplicative damage right there. And then Tyrael's Might, Divine Barrage, damage increased by 100%. So that's it for the Uber Uniques there. We got some Paragon changes as well. So stat requirements for non-main stats reduced from 90 to 60 per Paragon board. And here's the developer's note. A class's main stat is the one that increases the damage of all their skills. For example, Sorcerer's main stat is Intelligence, so this stat affects the rare Paragon nodes that have threshold bonuses for Dexterity and Willpower. The stat requirements to activate any rare node increases for each Paragon board you progress through. Some of these nodes that require non-main stats are harder to activate than intended. This change makes it easier to activate these nodes, especially on later Paragon boards. So with the itemization change, you noticed how you couldn't get all stats on your class-specific gear, or if I was a sorcerer in this example, you couldn't get dex on your gear. So this is going to help you activate those bonuses on those rare Paragon nodes that you couldn't get prior to this patch. So let's go over to some class-specific changes now. So it's all mostly buffs across the board here. So Barbarian first. Whirlwind, damage is being increased by 15%. Violent Whirlwind, bonus damage increased from 30 to 35%. Call of the Ancients, damage increased across the board here. Prime Call of the Ancients, damage bonus increased from 20 to 25. That's going to be good for the Bash Bards that takes this skill. Frenzy damage increased by 8%. Flay, bleeding damage over time increased by 8%. Enhanced Flay, vulnerable duration increased from 3 to 5 seconds. Battle Flay, bleed damage bonus increased from 10 to 15%. And then Combat Flay, maximum stack amount increased from 4 to 5, damage reduction increased from 3 to 4, buff duration increased from 3 to 6. Now moving on to passives for Barbarian. We got a change to Pressure Point here. Previously, Lucky Hit, your core skills have a chance, or 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. But now it's your core and weapon mastery skills have a 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So they included weapon mastery as well as core in this. Tough as Nails, additional thorns as bleeding damage increased from 10 to 15%. And moving on to the key passives, Walking Arsenal, damage per unique source of weapon damage increased from 10 to 12%. And moving on to legendary aspects. Aspect of Tempering Blows. Weapon swaps to activate the effect are reduced from 6 to 5. Slacking aspect. Previously it was Lucky Hit. You have a 45 to 60% chance to gain 20 Fury when Ren deals direct damage to at least one bleeding enemy. Now, Lucky Hit. You have up to 45 to 60% chance to gain 20 Fury when a core skill deals direct damage to at least one bleeding enemy. Maximum Fury is increased by 5 to 20%. So they changed it from Rend to core skill, and they also added this little extra maximum Fury increase. Dust Devil's aspect. Whirlwind Dust Devil damage increased by 100%. So Whirlwind and Dust Devil barbs, you guys are going to be eating good tonight. Or on Monday. Aspect of Relentless Arms Master. Before, you would gain 35 to 65% increased Fury regen, while all bonuses from the Walking Arsenal key passive are active. Now, you gain that same amount of increased Fury generation and 15% reduced Fury cost to your skills while all bonuses are active from the Walking Arsenal key passive. And we're moving on to the Barbarian unique items. Gore's devastating grips. Whirlwind explosion damage increased from 25 to 35% of base damage to 40 to 50%. So Gore's is getting a little nice buff there. And then we got Ancient's Oath. Damage increased from 30 to 50 to 40 to 60. Nice little buff there. And then moving on to Druid. Druid's getting a little bit of love this season, or this patch. I know it's needed it. So all the Spirit Boons. Looks like we got some buffs from the Spirit Boons across the board. Gift of the Stag, maximum Spirit increased from 20 to 40. Prickle Skin, Thorns amount increased by 100%. Advantageous Beast is getting changed a bit. So previously, reduces the duration of crowd control and pairing effects by 15%. Now, you gain 15% movement speed and 15% impairment reduction. So you're getting extra movement speed now with that. That's cool. Scythe Talons, crit chance increased from 5 to 10%. Iron Feather, maximum life increased from 15 to 14 to 20%. Swooping attacks, attack speed increased from 10 to 15%. Energize, spirit restored increased from 20 to 30. Bolster, fortify amount increased from 15 to 25% of your maximum life. And then Obsidian Slam, kills required to guaranteed overpower reduced from 10 to 20. So a little bit of a buff to overpower here, which is nice to see. Skill changes. Rabies, poisoning damage increased by 25%. Pulverize, damage increased by 76%. And then Raging Pulverize. There's a change here. Previously, enemies overpowered by Pulverize are stunned for 3 seconds. Now, Pulverize deals 30% multiplicative damage, increased overpower damage. Enemies overpowered by Pulverize are stunned for 3 seconds. So they kept the stun, but they added this extra increased overpower damage. So Pulverize is getting a nice buff and overpower in general for Druid here. Then moving on to the passives. Nature's Fury. Chance to trigger a free skill of the opposite category increased from 30 to 35%. Perfect Storm. Damage bonus increased from 20% to 30%. Nature's Reach. Damage to distant enemies increased from 3, 6, 9 to 5, 10, 15%. It's going to be nice for the Tornado Druids, for sure. Toxic Claws. Poisoning amount increased from 8, 15, 23 to 12, 24, 36 of the skill's base damage. So, got some buffs to Poison Druids here as well. That's nice to see. Quick Shift. Maximum damage bonus increased from 6, 12, 18 to 8, 16, 24%. Defensive Posture is a change here. So previously, it increased the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources by 10, or by 5, 10, 15%. Now it increases the Fortify you gain from all sources by 5, 10, 15%, and also you gain 3, 6, 9% damage reduction while fortified. So you get some extra damage reduction here while fortified. It's nice. Mending is getting a change here. Previously, while in Werebear form, you receive 6, 10, or 6, 12, 18% additional healing from all sources. Now, while in Werebear form, you receive the same additional healing from sources, but you also gain increased life, 4, 8, and 12% at the maximum rank there. And we got to change to Provocation here. Time in Werebear form required for overpower reduced from 24, 20, 16 to 20, 16, 12. So yeah, another Pulverize and Overpower buff here. And moving on to the legendary aspects for Druid. Aspect of Trampled Earth. Landslide damage increased from 50 to 80 to 70 to 100 of normal damage. Subterranean. Damage bonus increased from 10 to 15 to 15 to 30. Aspect of the Alpha. Werewolf Companion damage increased from 85 to 115 to 100 to 130. And then Unsatiated aspect. Shred damage when cast above 50 spirit increased from 10 to 25 to 20 to 30. And then moving on to Paragons. Constricting Tendrils legendary node. Damage increased from 120 to 150%. Dominate Glyph. Damage bonus after an overpower increased from 12x to 15x. So yeah, some nice Druid buffs across the board here. If you look on later on in the bug fixes, looks like they fixed some issues with Boulder as well, which is good to see. And moving on to Necromancer. So Book of the Dead, across the board, looks like they're buffing all of these sacrifices. So trying to make the other builds more in line with the minions this season, because minions are just absolutely crushing it right now, right? So yeah, Skirmisher Sacrifice upgrade, critical strike bonus increased from 5 to 10%. Defender Sacrifice upgrade, resistance to all elements increased from 20 to 25. Reaper Sacrifice upgrade, shadow damage increased from 15 to 20%. Shadow Mage's Sacrifice upgrade, maximum essence increased from 15 to 20. Now also increases essence generation by 20%. Cold Mage Sacrifice, damage to vulnerable enemies increased from 15 to 20%. Bone Mage's Sacrifice, overpower damage increased from 25 to 30%. Bone Golem Sacrifice, attack speed bonus increased from 10 to 15%. Blood Golem Sacrifice, maximum life bonus increased from 10 to 15%. And then Iron Golem Sacrifice, critical strike damage bonus increased from 30 to 35. And if you also remember, there was a bug in the patch that counted your new pet companion as a minion, so you couldn't have these benefits from the sacrificial stuff in the Book of the Dead, but that has been patched, so that's fixed now. You'll see that later in the patch notes. And moving on to the Paragon board, Blood Begets Blood legendary node, maximum damage increased from 15 to 30%. Blood Drinker Glyph, fortify bonus increased from 7 to 10% of your maximum life. Desecration Glyphs, shadow damage bonus increased from 15 to 20%. And then Gravekeeper Glyph, damage bonus increased from 2 to 3%, up to a maximum of 12 to 18% for every close corpse. And we're moving on to legendary aspects for the Necromancer. Sacrificial aspect. Sacrificial bonus increased from 10 to 25 to 35 to 50. That's a pretty big buff right there for the sacrifice builds. Then we got Shielding Storm aspect change. So previously, each time that Bone Storm damaged an enemy, you would gain barrier equal to 1 to 6% of your base life for 10 seconds. Now it's going to state that each enemy, or each time a Bone Storm damages an enemy, you gain barrier equal to 1 to 6% of your maximum life for 10 seconds. So the change here is from base life to maximum life. So that's going to scale a lot better. And moving on to Rogue. Rogue melee builds are getting buffed across the board, looks like. So Twisting Blades, initial damage increased by 20%, return damage increased by 20%, and then Flurry, damage increased by roughly 25%. And moving on to the passives. Exposure. Lucky Hit no longer requires direct damage to proc and will now also work on damage over time effects. Sturdy, damage reduction increase across the board, so from 4, 8, 12 to 6, 12, 18. Mending Obscurity is getting reworked here, so previously, while stealth you heal for 4, 8 to 12% maximum life per second, now it's when entering stealth, every second while stealthed, you heal for that 5, 10, 15%. So the healing's getting buffed, and they changed the wording here, so while you're entering stealth, and every second while stealthed, you get that. And moving on to the Paragon. Versatility Glyph. Non-basic and non-core skill damage skills increased from 15 to 25%. Fluidity is getting changed here, so previously, when you casted an agility skill, you would gain 9% increased energy regen for 6 seconds. Now when you cast an agility skill, you gain 10% increased damage and 15% increased energy regen for 6 seconds. So they're buffing the energy regen and also giving you some multiplicative damage here as well, which is really nice. And moving on to Explosive Glyph, damage reduction is increased from 10 to 15%. Diminished Glyph, damage reduction increased from 10 to 15%. Then on to Legendary Aspects. Blade Dancer, this is a Twisting Blades aspect, so damage increased from 30 to 60 to 50 to 80. Aspect of Artful Initiative, energy required to drop grenades reduced from 10 or 100 to 75, and the grenade damage increased by 50%. Aspect of Surprise, grenade damage increased by 200%. And when using Shadow Step, grenades now drop at the location the player teleports to instead of where they teleported from. This only changes where grenades drop when using Shadow Step, not Evade, according to this developer's note here. Trickster's Aspect, grenade damage increased by 50%. Enshrouding Aspect, time required for Dark Shroud reduced from 3 to 2 seconds. And we got to change to Umbrus here. Previously, critical strikes with marksman skills have a 45 to 60% chance to grant a free Dark Dark Shroud Shadow. Now its critical strikes, they took out the marksman skills, have the same chance to grant a free Dark Shroud Shadow. So now I don't need to take a marksman ability to activate this, which is cool. And moving on to aspect of Arrow Storms. Arrow Storm damage increased by 30%. Bonus damage dealt by Arrow Storms increased from 25 to 35 to 30 to 40%. Then we got Vengeful Aspect. Arrow Storm damage increased by 30%. And moving on to the unique items for Rogue. Eyes in the Dark. So previously, Death Trap deals 50 to 70% increased damage unless it hits a boss or player. Death Trap will continue to rearm itself until it kills an enemy. Now Death Trap deals 50 to 90% increased damage and will rearm itself a second time. So they changed the wording here and they buffed the increased damage. Saboteur's Signet, grenade damage increased by 50%. That's one of the new unique rings. And on to Sorcerer. We got a change to Ice Armor here. Barrier amount increased from 30% of base life to 25% of maximum life. So they changed the amounts here, but it's an overall buff because we're going from base life to maximum life for the Ice Armor here. Shimmering Teleport. Duration increased from 3 to 4 seconds. Incinerate. Damage reduction increased from 15 to 20%. That's it for the skills. Moving on to the passives for Sorcerer. Potent Warding. Maximum resistance increased from 123 to 246. Adjusted functionality no longer excludes basic skill casts, so that's nice. Glass Cannon, additional damage taken reduced from 369 to 246. So we got a nice Glass Cannon buff. We still have the same amount of damage that we deal, but we take less damage for taking this point here. Align the elements. Persistence duration increased from 2 to 3 seconds. Conduction movement speed increased from 369 to 4812%, and duration increased from 3 to 4 seconds. Electrocution. Reduced enemy damage dealt increased from 5, 10, 15 to 6, 12, 18%. Warmth. Healing per nearby burning enemy increased from 0.3, 0.6, 0.9 to 0.5, 1, and 1.5%. It's a nice little healing buff there. And then healing per burning boss increased from 0.6, 1.2, 1.8 to 246. Inner Flames bonus damage while healthy increased from 369 to 4812. Overflowing Energy cooldown reduction for hitting elite enemies increased from 0.25 to 0.35 seconds. Avalanche is getting a nice buff. Bonus damage increased from 45 to 60%. I was using this key passive here on my Frozen Orb build, and that's going to be a nice buff to it. We'll see how that affects the boss damage, though. And we got Combustion here. Bonus damage per unique source of burning increased from 2 to 4%. Esu's Ferocity, critical strike chance increased from 5 to 10%. Shatter's getting a little buff here. Bonus damage increased from 25 to 30%. Veer's Mastery is getting a buff as well. Bonus damage increased from 15 to 20%, and bonus damage after critical strike increased from 20 to 25. So nice little buffs there for the Sork. And onto the aspects. Aspect of Concentration. Damage reduction increased from 10 to 20 to 15 to 25. Aspect of Unbroken Tether. Additional Chain Lightning chains increased from 4 to 5. Aspect of Overwhelming Currents. Chance to cast an additional shock skill increased from 15 to 30% to 25 to 40%. And we got a nice change to Mage Lord's aspects here. This is really cool. So previously, your Veer's Mastery would grant you 69% damage reduction for each close enemy, up to 18 to 27%. Now, Veer's Mastery just grants you the straight 6 to 9 damage reduction, but it triples when fighting a close enemy. So you don't need to have like multiple close enemies to get the maximum benefit of this. You just need to fight like a close enemy, just one, and you get like tripled. So it's going to be helpful for bosses, for sure. Aspect of Shattered Stars. Meteorites damage increased from 20 to 35 to 30 to 45%. Aspect of Frozen Memories. Additional cast increased from 1 to 2. And then Battlecaster's Aspect. Maximum stacks increased from 3 to 5. And we got some changes to some of the Sorcerer unique items here. Flame Scar, Ember's damage increased by roughly 35%. Esidora's Overflowing Cameo, damage increased for every 100 intelligence, increased from 50 to 60%. Staff of Endless Rage, bonus damage increased from 40 to 60% to 50 to 70%. Gloves of the Illuminator, damage penalty reduced from 35 to 25 to 30 to 20%. So that's it for the Sorcerer. Got some nice buffs across the board there. And moving on to the end game. So this is some surprising stuff to me. So health and damage levels have been reduced in the pit. The adjustment is most significant as players approach tier 60, so more players can fully participate in masterworking. So it seems like they're nerfing the pit a little bit, so more players can enjoy the like tier 60s pits and up. So it'll be a little bit easier for people to farm that Neath Iron, the highest tier material in the pit, to fully masterwork your items. So it says, developer's note, we're adjusting the pit so more players can enjoy a smoother endgame progression experience. And then last note here on the endgame, all tormented bosses have had their health reduced by 30%. This includes blood boils from Tormented Echo of Lilith. So I'm going to have to test this out later. And then we got some bug fixes here, much needed changes. So fixed an issue where Holy Bolt's elixir damage was scaling unintentionally high when it was triggered from pets such as Necromancer's minions. So that was an issue with Holy Bolts doing like way more damage than intended. Here's the developer's note. Holy Bolt's elixir now deals a percentage of your weapon damage rather than percentage of enemy's health. So if you remember, like previously, Hydras used to deal damage based on health, Bulwark used to do the same. So this is like fixing that issue as well. So this change is intended to reduce its effectiveness against the toughest enemies in higher tiers of pit, but will still be really valuable for players throughout the whole game. We made this change alongside a reduction to the health of enemies in the pit, so players who are delving deep into the pit aren't heavily affected. So that's partially where the pit changes are coming from too, because they're fixing the bug with Holy Bolt's elixir damage. And here's the Druid change here with Boulder that I mentioned earlier with boulders. So the fixed an issue where casting boulders with Dolmen Stone would cause it to not cast at all. Boulders now have a limit of 10, but their damage increased by 10% for each boulder. So it'd be nice to see some boulder druids coming back. And fixed an issue with rapid fire with Scoundrel's Kiss equipped. Couldn't properly hit close targets and could sometimes fire projectiles behind the player. This also increases the radius of explosions by 25%. So nice Scoundrel's Kiss fix here. And then lastly, fixed an issue where pets were being counted as minions in various cases. So when you were a Necromancer, if you sacrificed your minions, you wouldn't be able to benefit from that fully because you had your pet, and that was counting as a minion. And then this was benefiting druids that were taking Shepherd's aspect because it was counting as a companion. So that is fully fixed now. And that's it for the notes. Yeah, so TLDR, buffs to potions, buffs to aspects, Uber Uniques, Paragon, rare glyphs are being more accessible. Barbarian Whirlwind buffs, Dust Devils, Druid boons are getting buffed. Boulders fixed. Pulverize is getting buffed. Poison builds as well. Overpower too in some cases. Sacrificing for Necros is getting buffed. Rogue melee is getting buffed. Sorcerer. We got buffs across the board here. Ice armor. Some key passives and aspects. And then pit adjustments for endgame and tormented boss nerfs here. And then the of course the bug fixes with Holy Bolts, Boulders, Rapid Fire, Scoundrel's Kiss Ring, and the pet bug here. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that. If you guys have any comments, questions, leave some down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all later. Take care. Peace.